Right, so Keir Starmer's having another absolutely brilliant week. And by brilliant, I mean the kind of brilliant where you accidentally set your kitchen on fire trying to make toast. Because nothing says strong and stable leadership quite like your own MPs threatening to vote with the Tories to stop you doing something monumentally unpopular. Again. Welcome back to UK Political Insight, where we track the government's U-turn count like it's a loyalty card scheme. Collect 10 U-turns, get a free apology that doesn't actually apologise for anything. Today's special offer, the potential scrapping of jury trials, because apparently when you're trying to fix a justice system backlog, the obvious solution is to just, remove one of the foundational principles of British democracy. Simple, efficient, completely mad. So, let's talk about David Lammy's latest brainwave, shall we? The Justice Secretary has decided that the best way to deal with the Crown Court backlog is to ditch jury trials for certain cases. Yes, that jury trial. The one that's been around for over 800 years. The one that's literally embedded in our Constitution. That one. Lammy reckons it's the juries causing all the delays, which is a bit like blaming the passengers for traffic jams rather than, the fact that the roads are falling apart and nobody's bothering to fix them. Now, before we go any further, let's just appreciate the sheer audacity of this plan. We're talking about removing the right to be judged by a jury of your peers, which has been a cornerstone of justice since the Magna Carta. You remember the Magna Carta, right? That little document from 1215 that basically said, hey, maybe kings shouldn't just do whatever they want? Well, apparently in 2025, we've decided that nearly a millennium of legal precedent is just, outdated, inconvenient, slowing down the production line. Here's where it gets properly spicy though. Labour MP Carl Turner, who represents Kingston upon Hull East, has basically said, absolutely not, mate, and is leading a rebellion against his own government. Turner organised a letter signed by 39 Labour MPs condemning the plan, which, in parliamentary terms, is the equivalent of your mates staging an intervention because you've made one too many questionable life choices. And he's not just grumbling quietly in the tea room either. Turner's said he'll actually vote with the Conservatives to block this policy, even if it means losing the whip and getting suspended from the Parliamentary Labour Party. Let that sink in for a moment. A Labour MP is willing to risk his position in the party to vote with the Tories because he thinks what his own government is doing is that wrong. That's not just crossing the floor, that's practically moving house. And Turner's not being shy about why he thinks this is nonsense either. He's pointed out that 75 Crown Court courtrooms out of 516 aren't even being used right now. So we've got empty courtrooms gathering dust, but apparently the problem is definitely the juries. Right, that's like having a restaurant with half the tables empty and blaming slow service on the fact that customers insist on chewing their food. The logic's not quite landing, is it? The government's defence is that this is all about tackling the backlog in Crown Courts, which has ballooned to nearly 80,000 cases. Current projections suggest it could hit 100,000 by the end of the decade if nothing changes. And fair enough, that's genuinely terrible. People are waiting years for their day in court, justice is being delayed, and as we all know, justice delayed is justice denied. But here's the thing, removing fundamental legal rights to speed up the system isn't fixing the problem. It's just lowering the bar until the problem looks smaller by comparison. It's a bit like responding to NHS waiting lists by just deciding that some conditions don't need treatment anymore. Oh, you've been waiting 2 years for that hip replacement? Well, good news. We've decided hips are optional now. Problem solved. Next. What makes this particularly entertaining, in a dark comedy sort of way, is that David Lammy himself has previously called jury trials fundamental. Yes, the same David Lammy who's now trying to scrap them. In politics, we call this character development, or hypocrisy. Depends on your perspective, really. The Conservatives, naturally, are having an absolute field day with this. Shadow Justice Minister Kieran Mullen called Lammy Calamity Lammy, which is the kind of nickname that writes itself, really, and accused Labour of taking a wrecking ball to the justice system. He said curtailing jury trials is an outright attack on the rule of law, and that the Conservatives will always stand against such a naked assault on democratic systems. which is rich coming from a party that spent 14 years presiding over the creation of this very backlog in the first place. But that's politics for you. Never let your own track record get in the way of a good attack line. But it's not just politicians kicking off about this. The 4 bars, which represent barristers across Britain and the Republic of Ireland, have released a statement saying they're deeply concerned. These are the people who actually work in the courts every single day, and they're saying there's no evidence this change will actually reduce the backlog. They've pointed out that the proposal goes further than even Sir Brian Levison's recommendations, which themselves haven't been properly piloted or modelled. So we're not just ignoring centuries of legal tradition, we're also skipping the whole let's test this first stage and going straight to implementation. What could possibly go wrong? Now, let's zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture here, because this isn't happening in isolation. This is just the latest in what's becoming quite the impressive collection of U-turns from Starmer's government. We've had the winter fuel payment debacle, where the government tried to means test payments and faced massive backlash. We've had the disability benefits fiasco. We've had the inheritance tax on farms controversy that had the countryside up in arms, quite literally. We've had the 2-child benefit cap drama, the waspy women compensation row, and the employment rights walkback. At this point, Keir Starmer's government has done more reversing than a learner driver in a cul-de-sac. And the thing about U-turns is, they're not inherently bad. Sometimes changing course when you realize you're wrong is actually the sensible thing to do. But when you're doing them this frequently, it starts to look less like responsive leadership and more like you never really thought things through in the first place. The pattern is becoming painfully predictable. Government announces policy is immediately unpopular. Labour MPs rebel or threaten to rebel, government either backs down or faces defeat. Rinse and repeat. It's like watching someone try to navigate a maze by just walking into every wall until they find the exit. What's particularly galling about this is that the solution to the court backlog is actually not that complicated. It's just expensive. You need more judges, more courtrooms being used, more court staff, better funding for legal aid so cases don't drag on forever. You need investment in the infrastructure of justice, but instead we're getting quick fixes that undermine the system itself. Carl Turner gets this, which is why he's willing to risk his political career over it. He's looked at the government's reasoning and basically said, have you tried, I don't know, actually using the courtrooms we already have? It's not rocket science, it's not even particularly creative problem solving. It's just obvious. But apparently, obvious doesn't play well when you're trying to look like you're taking decisive action. The irony here is almost painful. Labour spent years in opposition criticising the Conservatives for undermining institutions and eroding democratic norms. And now, in government, they're proposing to scrap a legal right that's older than Parliament itself. You really couldn't make it up. Well, you could, but it would be rejected for being too on the nose. What's also fascinating is the political calculation that Turner and his fellow rebels are making. They're not just opposing this policy, they're willing to be seen voting with the Tories to stop it. In the tribal world of Westminster politics, that's massive. Labour MPs voting with Conservatives is supposed to be unthinkable. It's breaking the ultimate party loyalty rule. But Turner's calculated that some things are more important than party unity, and fundamental legal rights apparently make that list. His prediction that the government might be defeated in the Commons before the Lords even get a chance to block it is particularly spicy. The Lords have already shown it's willing to push back over government overreach, but if Labour can't even get this through their own MPs in the Commons, that's a whole different level of embarrassment. That's not just a defeat, that's a humiliation. And here's where it gets really interesting for Starmer politically. Every U-turn chips away at the image of competence and authority. Every rebellion from his own backbenchers weakens his control over the parliamentary party. Every time he has to back down, it makes the next rebellion more likely, because MPs learn that if they push hard enough, the leadership will fold. It's a death spiral of authority, and Starmer's getting dangerously close to the event horizon. The government got time to change course here. The legislation isn't drafted yet. There's space for Lammy to quietly shelve this idea and pretend it never happened. But the question is whether they've got the political wisdom to actually do it. Because right now they seem determined to charge ahead with a deeply unpopular policy that their own MPs hate, that the legal profession opposes, and that threatens to undermine one of the oldest principles of British justice. It's worth remembering that governments don't lose power all at once. They lose it gradually, through 1,000 small defeats and embarrassments that accumulate over time until everyone realises the emperor has no clothes. Starmer's government is barely 6 months old, and we're already seeing the warning signs. The honeymoon period is well and truly over, and what's left is starting to look uncomfortably shaky. So, what happens next? Well, if Turner's right about the level of opposition in the Commons, we could see this policy dead before it even gets to a vote. The government might quietly announce they're consulting further, or reviewing the proposals, which is political speak for we've realised this is a disaster and we're backing away slowly while pretending we plan to do this all along. Alternatively, they might try to tough it out, force a vote, and risk a humiliating defeat that would make headlines and further damage Starmer's authority. Either way, it's another mess of the government's own making, another example of announcing policy without